how do you integrate play and creativity into your work and routine more? It's a question that my friend Gary Ware, the founder of Breakthrough Play and the author of the book Playful Rebellion, has been asking for many, many years. He has over 14 plus years of experience helping corporations and leaders rethink about this as they develop new strategy, team development, and leadership. And one of the things you'll quickly notice is just this genuine curiosity and positive energy of wanting to bring out the best in others. I had the joy of hearing him speak live at the same event I was also a speaker in 2023 to witness his magic. So today, as we celebrate Black innovators for Black History Month, I am so thrilled to have you here. I'm your host, Monica King, founder and CEO of Innovators Box, and you are listening to Curious Monica by Innovators Box. Let's dive in. Excited to have Gary. First question for you is, how in the world did you fall in love with creativity and play?
If you were to ask my mom, she would say that, since I could talk, I have always been creative, always been that curious being, very playful. And yeah, so it's been, since the beginning, but focus specifically on, me consciously being creative and doing creative things. I'd like to think that it really happened around the age of like 4 or 5. That's usually when kids are super curious and creative. I got in a lot of trouble, not like because I didn't do things, to be malicious or anything like that. I was just like, ooh, what do we do here? How do we do this? And so I was the one that was taking things apart. And then I was like, oh, uh-oh. And then putting things back together. I was like, oh, what if we do this? What if we do that? And so that's where I got my start. And then as our brains are always connecting the dots, I always ask, well, what about this? What if we did this? And I think that was the catalyst for me being creative.
I love that. Love that. And as we know from stats, for many of our followers who have been following creativity, we might all have started being creative, but we kind of lose it along the way. And so, Gary, I'm curious, what is one tip for you that continues to help hone your creativity? And if you get a chance to see some of his photos, you can already see a glimpse of the playfulness, and including you'll see him on stage, also even with Star Wars puppets. So,
yeah.
How do you get inspired? How do you keep that interness? Because honestly, throughout the workplace, and I know you've worked in different organizations before you became a master facilitator, which we'll talk about too. How do you keep with it? Because it's so often, I wonder, do you ever even get stuck as well?
I do. I get stuck a lot. And it wasn't until I started diving into this work and really studying, what does it take to be creative, did I know, oh, this is a practice. This is not just something that, oh, someone just happens to be creative and look at that. Yes, there's sort of an innate creativity, that some people maybe are, just out of the box or maybe a little bit more creative than others. But I learned that creativity is just problem solving. And so I'll answer the first question, which is if you're like, yeah, I want to be more creative and I want to keep it up. Just like when you go to the gym, if you want to get those 6-pack abs for the summer, you don't just do crunches one time. You make it a practice. And the practice of being creative is just, how can we stimulate our brain? How can we challenge ourselves to create something new and novel? And so a practice that I do is, I don't do it daily, but I do it often, is I get out a journal and I give myself a random prompt. Something so if you're just starting this, something simple. And just list it out. What are 10 things that you can do during the summertime? Oh, all right, go to the beach, maybe go pick flowers, something like that. And again, set a timer, see how long it takes, and just boom, 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 write it out. It's not about necessarily being accurate or right, but it's just getting your brain in the practice of creating a list, so now you are starting to do that. As you get a little bit more proficient in that, make it very challenging. What are ways that we can solve world hunger? And it's not like you're going to implement some of these, but again, you are just working your brain in a low stakes environment. Again, no one even has to know about these. You don't have to share any of these, but it's very low stakes. Whether you finish the list or not, no one's going to be harmed by this, but it's getting our brains conditioned to start to think, sort of outside the box. So that is a way to stay creative, and it's something that I do, and it's fun. Sometimes I reflect and go back to these lists to see, hey, this is pretty interesting. Maybe there's something I can do with it. But yes, I get stuck, quite often, as a solopreneur, running a business pretty much, by myself, often, I get in these ruts where I'm just like, I'm missing, that, I don't know, that je ne sais quoi, like just interacting with others.
Yeah.
And I have to remind myself, hey, reach out to someone or, go back to the things that, that you love to do. So, yeah.
So many reminders and insights, and innovators, as you're listening, I hope you caught some of the key details, right? It's really key to take a moment to break it down, make it something tangible, start somewhere where you can. But also, as Gary highlighted, like find what is in your groove. Like it's okay to, experiment, actually create a room and space where you could experiment. And Gary, to that point, I'm curious if we can actually go back, actually all the way back to your childhood and tell me, like who did you want it to be when you grew up? And like, what are kind of, I guess, I don't know, the early memories? I don't think I remember how I was in 4 or 5 years old. You kind of hinted you kind of did, but I'm curious, like, how has your early part of childhood influenced the type of innovator you are today?
Yes. It's so interesting. I really admire the folks that, said, when I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And look at me now, I'm an author and this, that, the other. When I was a kid, I wanted to be so many different things. This one thing I don't personally remember, but my mom tells this story, my grandma tells this story, my aunt tells this story. So I'm like, there has to be some kernel of truth. So growing up, my parents worked. So my grandma often took care of me, and we would go, grandmas love to spoil, their grandkids. And I was the first grandson.
Thank you, grandmas out there.
Right? I was the first grandkid. I'm the oldest, like in my sort of cohort. And so we used to go to a store called Kmart. Kmart, I don't even think is around anymore, but I loved going there. I loved shopping with my grandma. And I said to my grandma, I want to work here. I want to be the manager of Kmart. Clearly, as my life went on, I did not do that, but I said all kinds of other things. At one point, I wanted to be a scientist, and I wanted to be a teacher. I grew up playing music. So as I got older, I started to really hone in on this thing. And at one point, I really thought I was going to go into music and be a music educator because that was something I was very passionate about. I started playing the clarinet when I was in 6th grade, and I, kept playing. And when I was in high school, I was in the band. I learned how to play the saxophone, learned some percussion, and because it was so transformative in my life, music and music education, I was like, yeah, that's something I wanted to do. Matter of fact, when I graduated and I went to university, that was my initial major, was music education. However, what ended up happening, and this is something that in the time, so it all works out, and I'll tell you like how, even though I'm not doing these things, I feel like I'm using the kernel of these things. One person, was talking about like, what I'm going to school for. And this person just sort of, just as a throwaway comment is like, you sure that's what you want to do? Be a music teacher? They're cutting arts funding. There aren't very many of those out there. You might have to teach other subjects. And because I was so like, just wanted to teach music, I didn't want to teach social studies or math or anything like that. I started second guessing myself. And then I was like, well, what do I want to do? Granted, I'm glad that I was early in my sort of college career that there was time to make these pivots. But I sort of reflected of like, well, what do I like doing? I was like at this like, I'm like 18, 19 years old. Like it is like to have this existential crisis of like, oh, I don't know. What do I want to do? And at the time, like I said, music was a big part of my life. I was in a band. I played in a ska band. If you're familiar with that music, it's sort of pop meets punk meets reggae sort of thing. I played the saxophone in that. But at the time, this is the late 90s, and I was building websites I was building
Uh-huh.
like our
Mhm.
website. Like I was the quote unquote webmaster, like before that was like a thing. But it was so much fun. I love
Mm.
sort of creating this and like all the elements that went behind this. There wasn't at the time, there wasn't really like a major for this. And so I was talking to a counselor and the like at first they're like, well, is it engineering? Is it programming? And all these things. And then fortunate for me, I learned that there was a school. So I lived, like I said, I grew up in San Diego, and there was a school in Los Angeles called the Art Institute, and they had a program called multimedia web design. And I was like, that's it. And so
That's perfect.
that like propelled me on this thing of
Uh,
being a web designer and working in digital media. I know I wouldn't be on your question of what do I want to be when I
no.
grow up. But so getting back to the point of like again,
Yeah.
I as a teacher and scientist, I have this sort of belief that the things that we're curious in sometimes just show up. So as I said, at one point I wanted to be a scientist. I still feel like to this day I'm still experimenting. Scientists experiment. They have hypotheses. They use a scientific method to like sort of play these things out. So I'm not like scientists in the traditional sense, but I feel like a lot of the work that I do is very experiential, and I do a lot of experimentation. And as far as teaching, I never stopped, having a passion for learning and helping others learn.
Mm.
And so I feel like, I'm mixing all of these.
I love that. So many follow-up questions.
Yes.
But I think the big part I just want to acknowledge and just highlight here, as our listeners probably might have caught as well, this is the power of you actually taking charge and creating your own career, which I think now it's become more popular nowadays, but not like just 10, 20, even 30, 40 plus years ago when somebody was like, hey, I might want a job that don't exist. It's like, yeah, what are you talking about? But Gary, you kind of done that, and you're actually inspiring others and reminding others as well that like, hey, maybe the job or the type of work that you want to do, it doesn't exist yet. So experiment, explore, especially for those who are younger generations who's tuning in. And for even those who are in their second and third careers, it's okay, I think, to remember that as a leader, if you're kind of going through like, but Gary, Monica, like what happens if like I'm like in my 50s and 60s, like I've already been like leading and done everything. Like I can't go back to that type of experiment. I think that's still okay. And to that point, I think one thing I want to go a little bit deeper, Gary, is, one thing we kind of skimmed over as you were sharing that story is how you build your expertise. Now, it is one thing to say, hey, you can kind of tell the story backwards. Steve Jobs says that beautiful quote on it, but you still have to do it with intention. You can't just forcibly connect back and say everything makes sense. You still have to have a clarity in hindsight even, or even as you go forward. And so Gary, like you could still have, as you're going through all of that journey, to say like, well, yeah, it's all connected, but like, it's kind of all like also haphazard and it could look chaotic, but you are able to tie it together. And so I'm curious, like now for those who know Gary, like you will see him on stage often. He's keynote speaking. He's recognized by a lot of the culture and leaders and really tapping into playing creativity in a different way, but also a thoughtful, practical way. You do want to sit in some of his workshop and have him in your companies. But he's able to do that because of why. Like, I want to learn more, like, Gary, okay, if you can take us behind the curtains, like, how do you now sharpen yourself, improve your craft? Because just because you happen to have those capabilities doesn't mean that you're continuing to be a master. You're continuing to hone that. So can you share like maybe one or two ways how you're continuing to hone? And
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So great point about, honing your craft and understanding your why. I want to, before I get into like me specifically, I want to highlight something that you said of, oftentimes we're sort of pigeonholed of like, hey, you got to pick one career, you got to pick one thing. And I feel like that is great for a small subset of folks, like that are just like diehard, like I know exactly what I want to do and I know the exact career path, and that's great. But for the rest of us that are like sort of forced to go in one direction and it doesn't like fit right or sit right, then we just feel like, oh, I guess this is it. This is my life. This is all I have. And so I agree, like what you mentioned, times are changing. There's less of a like sort of focus to have to choose one major. A lot of folks that I've spoken with, they go to school to learn maybe in a specific topic, but keeping it open. I remember It's called the Wayfinding Academy. And it's a more unconventional sort of college in Portland. And they don't declare their major until they're about to graduate. You get an associate's. So the first, couple of years, they're experimenting, they're exploring so that they can see what fits. So the thing is, going back to myself, as I mentioned, my original first career path, once yes, I'm in it, was multimedia web design. And I went to the Art Institute. And the reason why I wanted to do that was yes, I really love digital media. I love creating in this space. And because of that, I was just curious and I just went deep and I learned as much as I could. And I applied that, to everything. I started making videos. I started creating websites and I did all these things. And just putting something out there, whether I shared it with the world or not, helped me, as you mentioned, sharpen the saw. And it wasn't until I was deep in my career where I realized, oh, there's something else, I'm passionate about. And that is, creating inclusive teams and, things of that nature and innovation and things like that. And once I got over the fact that I can change, I can shift directions, then it's all about the curiosity. I like to say, follow your curiosity and you'll never go wrong. And because of that, that led us to connecting, because that's how I found, the EPIC conference. And it was just, I wanted to become, at this point in my career, I'm a facilitator. I do keynotes, I do things in training. And so I'm always thinking about, all right, how can I get better? What are the bare bones that allow me to be masterful in my career? And how can I practice that?
So I want to dive deeper into that though, because there's probably facilitators and trainers who's okay, that all sounds great, but what is it then that makes Gary is there do you like to practice reading? Is it do you I also, as I mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation, you put a lot of content, which also takes a lot of work. He does a lot of funny jokes as well, follow his Instagram. And how do you have the time to do all of that? So I'm curious if you can share some practical insights. I don't know if it's too secret.
No.
But would love to know, because I think it would inspire other facilitators who might be a little overwhelmed to know, how do I stand out? How do I hone my craft?
Yeah. So the thing I got over very quickly is trying to be everywhere all at once. I may give the impression that I am everywhere all at once. However, especially with social media, digital media, it seems like every day there's a new medium. There's Be Real, and now there's Threads and Twitter's X, and we have YouTube, and what about TikTok and LinkedIn? And so I, as a content creator, really focus on just a couple of areas. Yes, Instagram is one of those. LinkedIn is another. Those are my core sort of area. Yes, if you want to see me on social media, those are the core areas. Yes, I am on other platforms, but I'm not as regular on those. But the main thing that I want to do, and this is what I learned from a good friend of mine and colleague, her name is Stephanie Garcia, and she talks about the rule of thirds. How can you celebrate the things that you're doing, humble brags, whatever it is. How can you celebrate the industry by sharing knowledge? And then how can you, celebrate, people? How can you elevate people? Whether it's, colleagues, customers, and things like that. And so that's what I take into consideration, when I'm posting. So I, am not trying to spend all of my time. But as far as my practice comes from it's something that I pull from a lot of different places. The first thing is my daily practice. Now, some folks would say you need to get up at 4:00 in the morning and blah, blah, blah. If that's for you, great. If that's not for you, whenever you get up is whenever you get up. As I'm sort of further along in my career, I'm realizing more importantly than getting up is making sure that you're rested. And so whatever that means to you. But in the morning, now I have 2 kids, one of which is 16 months. So I've learned to be flexible. But this is things that I tend to do that allows me to be the best version of myself. So I have a meditation practice, and I'm not the type that, meditates for hours at a time. That would be nice. But if I'm lucky and I have the space for it, I'll have 10 minutes. But sometimes it's just 2 minutes of just focusing on my breath, just sitting quietly. And I'm not here to give a lesson on mindfulness, but that practice of just silencing yourself. And it's not like you can be completely, of course, thoughts and stuff show up, but like of just practicing of like, I'm thinking and going back to the breath allows us to just be a little bit more focused, allows us to, have more empathy, a lot of great benefits from that. The next thing that I tend to do is I have an affirmation. What is something that allows me to, be forward thinking? My affirmation is one of two things. It's a statement that rings true to me, that it's something that helps me, sort of identify myself or something to focus on. And I have like an Evernote thing with all kinds of affirmations, and I'll pick and choose, some, but I'll say an affirmation. But affirmations for me are sometimes also in the form of a question. And I learned that if you ask a question, especially to yourself, you can't help but to think about the answer, but your brain is always searching for the answer of that question. And so one of the questions that I ask on the daily is, what is it? What amazingly awesome things will happen today? What
That's so
amazingly
intentional.
awesome things? Yes.
We're going to
And
definitely
so-
put that as a quote, as a reminder for everyone else to think about it. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. And
Wow.
it's just a way to sort of prime the brain to look for the good. Look for the good out
Yeah.
there. And so yeah, again, silence, affirmation, moving the body. And again, it doesn't have to be like, go to the gym. Sometimes it's just putting on some music and just,
Yeah. For those
shaking
who
it
are
out.
missing the video version, you'll have to revisit the video version where Gary is dancing for us and
Yes.
showing us live
And
demonstration.
it gets the endorphins flowing. It brightens up just in doing that in like the 3 seconds. Like I feel like the
Yeah.
room's a little bit brighter,
Oh yeah, we're gonna have to put a little sparkly fix too.
right?
And just to tie all of that, because those are a lot of great nuggets, and thank you, Gary, for sharing it. I
Yes.
think a lot of our listeners might be taking a lot of notes and good reminders. And what I love most about it is just like how holistic your insight sharing has been, right? Like it's not just about like this is the one thing or this. I loved even in all the questions you kind of reminded that hey, like it's gonna depend. Like some of you might be early birds, some of you might like be late. Evening folks. And I think it's okay to find what that craft is. I want to kind of channel this all back to, briefly on, of course, our kind of topic that everyone has been talking about, AI, and how that is
Yes.
also already influencing creativity and innovation. For those who might have also tuned in to my other show, Dear Workplace, we are doing a lot of research and sharing at how AI is changing in a lot of different industries. So check out that show too. But in regards to Gary, because of your expertise, do you ever feel like you're worried? I mean, first, quick yes and no. Like, are you worried that like there might going to be now an AI facilitator instead of like a Gary facilitator on stage? Like, should we worry about it? And are there other types of areas where you think AI actually helps versus hurt? So quick yes and no. And I'm curious if we can play on that.
There might be. I'm not concerned about that.
Not the same as Gary, though. Never the same as Gary.
Exactly. Well, that's the other thing of the human element, the human to human element, because, as a master facilitator like yourself, that, and actually, if I could just share it, a story like when we met at Epic and you had your session that I sat in and I thought it was amazing.
Thank you.
You were able to read the room. You were able to read the room and adjust accordingly so that we can have a very personalized experience. The thing about, artificial intelligence and the AI, it depends a lot on the prompt. It depends a lot on, what we're feeding out. And it's very static. It will be interesting to see if it can be dynamic and on the spot, understand, the people. That's great. Sure. But I've learned that with AI, it's only as good as the inputs that it receives. And so in addition to being a facilitator, one of the other things that I'm very passionate about is the other AI, which is called applied improvisation.
Oh, great spin.
Yeah. And that is using techniques that improvisers use to help them create stories on the spot, on the stage, in other contexts. And applied improvisation is all about collaboration. So I see AI as a collaboration tool. So that I'm answering your question with that. I'm
Yes.
happy to dive deeper with that, but I'm not too concerned.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I think, again, we're still only at the crisp of it. I think thinking about how vastly the internet has changed the way we interact, even just like pandemic time where we relearned about remote working and like all the hybrid experience, I think hopefully when we have Gary back on the show in many more years, we're going to have maybe a different AI related facilitator conversation. But I think to Gary's point, it's important to know where things are and continue to hone your craft, which is why we did focus on learning about how Gary's honing his craft. One thing also, Gary, I'm curious is that we touched upon this at the very beginning, but separate from even AI, like, it's no stranger that I think for those who are familiar with innovation and creativity and even leadership, that when either me, Monica, or Gary walks into the room, we are still one of the few. We're celebrating Black History Month right now. And so I'm curious, when you think about representation, is that a key aspect that you think about when you show into the rooms, and anything else you want to add in what you want to see more in creativity world?
Yes, representation matters for multiple reasons. It helps, the people in the room realize like, oh, someone like myself can be there, and it can maybe inspire someone to following your footsteps. And it just, it was one of the interesting things, growing up and not seeing a lot of people of color in like sort of educational roles and stuff like that. It just became the norm. And I just thought, it is what it is. But when I had my first, teacher of color, it was different in that, like, there was just something more familiar. They didn't necessarily treat me any different than any other teacher, but I just felt like, oh, all right, I belong here, and now that I'm thinking about it, it might have been, the fact that I started to see, other Black educators that, unconsciously, made me believe that, oh, I can do this too.
Very important. And to build on that, I do want to make it actionable for our listeners. If they're like, I'm guilty, I don't know enough Black innovators that I can learn from. Gary, could you shout out some people that we should learn from, follow, that you would recommend? Of course, Gary's one of them, but we want to make sure we expand on the list.
Yes. So the first person that comes...
And I want to just add, it's innovators who happen to be Black. I think that distinguish is very important. So, one of the things I often like about innovators who happen to be a female, I think the emphasis is that, everyone comes from it. Okay, just a little plug in on that, because I think it's really important on the nuance.
Right. So the first person that comes to mind is a gentleman. His name is Eric Bailey.
And I'll follow up on the spelling later with him. So don't worry, folks.
Yep.
Eric get the show notes later. It's probably there.
Is an author. He's a facilitator, and he wrote the book Cure for Stupidity. And I'm just going to leave it at that. It's an amazing book, but it's all about getting us to think about, coming together, think about our biases. If you are able to see Eric live, oh my gosh, you will learn so much. You will be entertained. You would educate. He's blown my mind, been someone that I admire and look up to. And so I've three specifically. So please. Eric is number one, and there are women in this space as well. Denise Jacobs is another one that comes to mind. Denise is also a facilitator. She's an author, and she talks about helping you banish your inner critic so that you can be the most creative version of yourself. And that is, very essential, because, we all have those thoughts. We all have, inside of our head, the thoughts like, oh, I'm not good enough. And she has an amazing framework to help you do that, and an amazing practice that not only can you banish your inner critic, but you can also, thrive from that. So those two. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention one of the first brown people I saw talking about play. And his name is Kevin Carroll. He has an amazing podcast. It's Kevin because he looks like one of Boyz II Men. He wears this vest. But more specifically, he has this red ball and he invites us to play. He used to work for Nike. Now he is, advocating for play and playfulness. And when I saw his talk, again, representation, I was like, oh, yeah, all right, I'm on the right track. And on top of that, there are space for me. So, and one last person, I know I said 3, but
we'll take it, please.
Once the brain keeps going, I just like, oh, yeah.
We'll just take one more for now, but yes, please.
This last one. His name is Jeff Harry, and he is someone that I personally collaborated with, and one of the most innovative and playful brown folks that I know. One of the things about Jeff, when he was younger, he and his friends in his basement would create their own versions of board games. They would mash them up, and I think that's really cool. That, you can take something old and put it together and you have something new. So he's always reinventing himself through the magic of play. So that's it. I'm going to stop
that.
right there.
No, I love that. Thank you so much. And Jeff, shout out back here as well. We had Jeff in the show last season. So if you missed his conversation, go back into it. But I'm going to tag in our little podcast notes again, find blog.innovatorsbox.com. If you can't find it, just email us at info@innovatorsbox.com. Just give you many different ways. You should follow them. If you're following me on LinkedIn, also, I'm going to be tagging all these folks to make sure I get that from Gary, because we want to learn from more people, which I think is part of the key, not just this month, but every single day. So very important. On that note, we're almost wrapping up. Oh my gosh, I feel like we're just getting started. But, you do, of course, have to follow Gary to learn more from his expertise, have a lot more exciting things coming from him in the horizon. But first, Gary, we touched upon a lot of different themes. Any final words about wisdom, advice, if they forget everything by chance, what is at least one thing you want them to walk away with when they think about anything, whether it's play or AI changing the world, or one advice?
I feel like the main thing is you can do it, and you can do it through action. A lot of times we think about things, but my invite to you is, what is one small thing? I mean, teeniest of things. If you think about something small and it's still too daunting, how can we make it smaller? But what is one small thing that can, start to put you on that path to be an amazing innovator, which in turn will make you be the best version of yourself? Because regardless if you're a stay-at-home mom or a CEO of a company, we all need to be innovators, because innovation is key to us thriving and, creating a better world for ourselves and the people around us. So yeah, maybe it's the thing that I mentioned, or maybe it's something completely different, but it is a practice.
Start one thing at a time. And hey, if you missed any of the insights, you can always rewatch this conversation, and that is part of the fun. And you are missing out on Gary dancing. So you better want to check out the video version when we share that. Gary, thank you so much. One final thing is, what's the best way people can stay in touch with you? I think one hint you already shared is Instagram and LinkedIn, which we'll share it in the notes. Any other things or ways that they can reach out to you and stay in touch?
Yes. And before I say that, I want to take a moment and acknowledge you, Monica. Thank you for having an amazing platform to highlight and elevate other people in this space. Rising tides raise all ships, and we need more folks like you. And if you were curious about anything that I said, yes, find me on social media. Also, go to my website, breakthroughplay.com. I answer all of my emails as fast as I can. But it is me. It's not AI or anything like that. I would love to chat with you.
Maybe,
right? Gary Bot.
But it's Gary for now. No, thank you so much. This was Gary Ware, who joined us, founder and CEO of Breakthrough Play and author of Playful Rebellion. So that's another hint, right? You can check out his book as well if you were a reader. But Gary, thank you so much. Really excited to celebrate Black History Month. And again, for folks who are new, please continue to remind yourself that we are the average of the 5 people we spend most time with. And so please, I hope you're surrounding with more innovators and new insights. So thank you so much. We'll see you again. Thanks so much for tuning into today's episode. Your support means the world to us, so we're so glad you're here. Want to do a little shout out for those in the team who made this possible. Thank you to everyone at Innovators Box Studios. Audio engineering and production is done by
Sam Lamert.
Audio engineering assistance by
Ravi Ladd.
Website and marketing support by
Cree Pandey.
Graphic support by
Leah Orsini.
Christine Eribal.
Original music by Innovators Box Studios. And executive producing, directing, writing, researching, and hosting by me, Monica King, founder and CEO of Innovators Box. Thank you for continuing on the journey of how to build a better workplace and thrive with creativity. Visit us at innovatorsbox.com and get some free resources at innovatorsbox.com/free. We look forward to seeing you at the next episode. Thank you and have a wonderful day.